So today we are moving into the quadratic formula, right? The last thing that we did was completing the square to solve, and with a couple of classes, I went through how we found what the quadratic formula was by completing the square. And I took like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And I completed the square on this to show them where the quadratic formula came from. But it's really time consuming. And maybe I'll make a recording of it later, but I won't take up your guys' class time doing it because you really don't need to know where it comes from or see how it works, but you do need to know how to use it, right? So this is the standard form of a quadratic equation. Right? And we've been using it a lot. It is not the quadratic formula. It is the standard form of the equation. The quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. That is the quadratic formula. And you guys, I'm sure, saw it in Algebra 1 way back when. But really, as long as you know what to plug in for A, B, and C, it's just a simplification, right? It's just solving this little bit. The best thing about the quadratic formula is it will solve any quadratic equation without exception, right? So what we're just going to do, I think the best way to show you the quadratic formula is to go about solving them, right? There are some steps to solving. The first one being write the equation in standard form. If it's not in standard form, you want it to be in standard form, right? This ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Write the equation in standard form. If it's already in standard form, you can go ahead and just skip this. But if it's not, you got to do that first. 2, you're going to identify what A, B, and C are. You're going to identify your A, your B, and C. And 3, you're going to plug them into the formula. And then 4, you're just going to simplify. Right? So those are your only steps. The key is knowing the formula, right? But it's written in front of you. You can keep it written in front of you the entire time you're doing it. I suggest memorizing it at some point. It's ingrained in my brain. I could see it in my sleep sometimes. But there it is. X equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So let's look at how we use it. If I have an example problem of x squared plus 2x minus 63 equals 0. It is already in standard form, right? We have everything in order of powers on the left side of the equation, and it's set equal to 0. It is in standard form. So I just need to identify my A, my B, and my C. And our A is always the coefficient of x squared. And if nothing's written there, we just know it to be 1. B is the coefficient of our x value. In this case, it is 2. And C is our constant. There's no x. There's no variable attached to it. And that, in this case, is going to be negative 63. And once we find those, all we are doing is plugging them in. So here is my formula. I've got x equals minus b. Well, that's just minus 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared? Well, that is 2 squared minus 4 times our a, which is 1, and our c, which is negative 63. All right, and all of this is over 2 times a, or 2 times 1. Now we have to simplify, and I know that this looks like a lot and it stresses people out. Take it one step at a time. I always do what's under the square root first, right? So if we look at that, we're just going to leave our minus 2 plus or minus alone for right now, and we're going to rewrite the square root. 2 squared is just 4, right? Minus 4 times 1 is negative 4. Times negative 3 is going to be positive, because a negative times a negative is positive, 252. Now I'm really smart, so I knew that right off the top of my head. That's a total lie. I didn't. I just happened to do this 5 other times yesterday. Over 2 times 1, which is just 2. So now it's getting a little easier to simplify, right? We still have to put these together. And we get minus 2 plus or minus the square root of 256 over 2. This, I know for a fact, is 16 times 16. If you don't know that, you have to break it down and figure it out. But I know that 16 times 16 is 256. So I'm just going to rewrite this as minus 2 plus or minus 16 over 2. Now notice this is 2 separate answers, right? This is x equals minus 2 plus 16 over 2. And it is also x equals minus 2 minus 16 over 2. And we need to simplify those. Negative 2 plus 16 is positive 14 divided by 2, right? That would be 14 over 2, which is just 7. This one, negative 2 minus 16, is minus 18 over 2, which is just negative 9. And so our x values are going to be 7 and negative 9. Now I'm going to show you plenty more, but how do you feel about that? Does that make sense to you? And as long as you know what your A, B, and C is, it's just plugging in and solving, right? It's doing the arithmetic. So I'm going to do several more sample problems for you so that you can see every aspect, right, that we would be doing. So the next one I'm going to do is negative x plus 2x equals 1. So in this case, it's not in standard form. We're not set equal to 0. So we're going to have to go ahead and put that into the standard form. Now, all we have to do is move this over, and we're just going to, we have a positive 1, so we're just going to subtract 1 from both sides and then rewrite it as minus x plus 2x minus 1 equals 0. And when we look at what is our A, our B, and our C, right, which is the next step, is to identify our A, B, and C. Our A, we've got a negative in front of that x, and that just means negative 1. Our B is a 2, and our C is negative 1. So all we have to do now is plug it into x equals minus B plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. I will write this for every problem because I want it to kind of start to sit with you, over 2a. And now we're just going to plug in our a, b, and c. So if I've got x equals minus b, well, that's just minus 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared. So that's just going to be 2 squared. I always put this in parentheses just in case it's negative. Times 4 times a, which is negative 1, and c, which is negative 1, all over 2 times a, which is -1. And now we're just going to slowly solve this. We've got -2 plus or minus. We're going to start working with what's under here. 2 squared is 4. We've got -4 times -1. -4 times -1 is +4 times another -1 is just -4. All over -2. When I simplify this, I get -2 plus or minus. Well, 4 minus 4 is just 0, so I have the square root of 0. Does anyone know what the square root of 0 is? Can either of you tell me what the square root of 0 is? Yeah, pretty easy, right? This is the one circumstance that you'll come across where you have a one answer solution, because this just becomes plus or minus 0, so it stays -2 over -2, which is just 1. So in this circumstance, x equals 1. And what that means when you get a situation like that is it means here at 1, your vertex of your graph lies. So that's why you would only get 1 point crossing through it. So whenever that happens, that you have one solution, it just means that your vertex lies right on that x-axis. This case, it's going down because it's a negative parabola. Look, I didn't even write the squared there. You guys didn't call me on that. It's a negative parabola, right? That x squared term is negative, so your parabola is going to open down instead of up. I want to do some that are a little harder, that don't break down perfectly. And then I want to do one that's imaginary as well, because I know you're going to have that in your homework. And so I want you to see everything that you could possibly have to look at. So our next example I'm going to do won't break down, the square root won't break down evenly. It won't be a perfect square. So here I have x squared minus 9 equals 4x. And I'm going to go ahead and put this in standard form by subtracting 4x from each side. And I can rewrite this as x squared minus 4x minus 9 equals 0. So now it's in my standard form, so I can find my a, b, and c. My a equals 1, my b equals -4, and my c equals -9. And again, I will just write this here so that you remember it. X equals minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a, just so that you can see it while we're working. So we're going to go ahead and plug those in. We're going to go x equals minus b. Well, b is -4, so I'm going to write minus -4. I want to remember that, or I will mess up the signs, right? It's minus b, but b is -4, so it's minus minus -4, and it's going to wind up being +4. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that is -4 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, and c, which is -9, all over 2 times a, which is just 2 times 1. So let's look at this. Negative times -4 is just 4. Plus or minus the square root. -4 squared is 16. Minus 4 times 1 is still -4. Minus 4 times -9 is +36. All over 2, which is going to give me 4 plus or minus the square root of 52 over 2. Now, 52 is not a perfect square. I know, because 7 times 7 is 49, and 8 times 8 is 64, and there's nothing in between those that's going to make that a perfect square. So if you remember, when we dealt with square roots, we had to break those down, right? So we have to look at 52. Now, here's the thing. If you're doing this in the worksheet and you get this far, I'll be like, yay, yes, you'll get most of your credit, right? If you do this on a test, same thing. Yay, yes, you'll get most of the credit because you've gotten to the solution, but you haven't fully simplified it, right? To get full credit, you're going to have to simplify it. So we're going to look at this and we're going to go, well, 52 is 2 times 26, and that is 2 times 13, and those can't be broken down anymore. So I could pull the square root of 4 out, which is just 2. So I can rewrite this now as 4 plus or minus 2 times the square root of 13, right? Because we have to put that 13 back under, all over 2. And technically, we're still not finished because everything here is reducible by 2, right? So for the actual solution, I have to go 4 divided by 2 is 2, plus or minus, well, 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we would just be left with the square root of 13. These are our solutions, right? If you get here or here, I'm going to give you most of the credit because I can see that you've got the idea and how to solve them and how to work the quadratic formula. But if you don't get to that perfect reducing of the problem, I would have to mark points off, right? I mean, you'd still get most of your credit, but you wouldn't get full credit unless you got me here. If we were doing an assignment online and you entered it this way, you would get marked wrong. Delta Math would mark you wrong. Even though you got to the right answer, you would be marked wrong. I'm going to do one more because I want you to see one with an imaginary solution as well, because you're going to have some of those in your homework. So I'm going to do this one and then you will be free as long as you feel like you're getting it. So our next example is going to be negative 3x squared plus 8x minus 7 equals 0. This is already in the standard form, so we don't have to deal with that, right? We don't have to move anything over. We just have to find our a, which is negative 3, our b, which is 8, and our c, which is negative 7, right? And again, just for the sake of boring you, we got minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So we're going to look at that. We're going to go x equals, well, our minus b is just minus 8 plus or minus b squared. So that's 8 squared minus 4 times a, which is negative 3, and c, which is negative 7, all over 2 times a, so 2 times negative 3. And we're just going to slowly go through and solve it. Minus a right now, we just, 8 right now, we just leave alone, b plus or minus. 8 squared is 64. Negative 4 times negative 3 is negative 12. And if we multiply that times negative 7, I'm sorry, negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. And if we multiply it times negative 7, we get negative 84, right? And all of this is over 2 times negative 3, which is negative 6. And when we go to work with that, we get negative 8 plus or minus, well, 64 minus 84 is negative 20 over negative 6. Do you remember how to deal with a negative underneath a radical, a square root? We have a negative under the square root. What do we do with that? How? Now, if you remember a while back, we So a square root means that we multiply something times itself, right? But we can't multiply anything times itself and get a negative. If I multiply, say, -4 times -4, I get positive 16. If I multiply 4 times 4, I get positive 16. Nothing would make a negative under a square root. So if you remember correctly, we pulled it out as something else. No, no. This is we went over imaginary numbers. Remember, we had a I squared equals -1, and the square root of -1 equals I. So ultimately, what we're pulling out is I will make it positive, right? So if I wrote this as -8 plus or minus I times the square root of 20, we got rid of that negative. Does that ring a bell now? No, we just had a test on it not that long ago. The next thing we have to do is break down that 20. It's not a perfect square, but we can pull stuff out of it because 20 is 4 times 5 and 4 is 2 times 2, right? So I can write this now as -8 plus or minus 2I times the square root of 5 over -6. And the only thing I'd have left to do now is reduce this fraction because everything is divisible by 2, right? Including this -6. So -8 divided by 2 is 4. Well, we could actually separate this one, but I'm not going to throw that at you right now. Or I can. -8 over -6 would be 4/3 plus or minus 2I over -6. Well, that would just be -1/3, but we still got our plus or minus, so it's just going to be 1/3 radical 5. I. You can write it as I. Or we could write it as 4/3 plus or minus radical 5 over 3 times I. There's several ways to write it. All of these are correct. This one is probably the prettiest way of writing it. Here's the thing though, because we're dividing everything by 2, we could have also written it as 4 plus or minus I radical 5 over 3. Which one of these is more correct? Probably this one, but I would call them pretty equal in their correctness. This one, just because technically when we're writing complex numbers, we should always write the real number and then the imaginary, but we're still doing that in this version. So would I mark any of the 3 of these wrong? No. All of these would be considered full credit. Any or all of them. This you would probably lose a couple points on because you didn't simplify. Any questions on that? I know we jumped into something different, but I know that you have an imaginary one in your homework. So I wanted to make sure you saw an example with an imaginary number. Right. So remember, if you come across one and you have a negative under the square root, just pull it out as an I and then make it positive. Right? It'll take that negative out and then you just solve it like a regular square root. You do have a worksheet to do. I'm going to stop recording at this point because nobody needs to hear me talk to you at this point with the